All right, we're good to go. I'll turn it over to you, John.
All righty, we are starting today on slide 208. And we have been talking about the Jubilee calendar. We've talked about the pattern over the 7,000-year period. And now we are going to tonight look at more examples of the use of the Jubilee calendar. And remember that its purpose, it doesn't do priesthoods, it doesn't do birthdays. Its purpose is more the big seasons of the earth, such as this slide. Each year has a Passover week. It's called the Mid-Year Fest. And in the big picture of the whole history of the earth, it corresponds to the meridian of time, which is exactly a 149-year Jubilee. And this slide is pointing out that John the Baptist, his birth up to the death of the Virgin Mary exactly covers, almost exactly to within a couple of days, the entire meridian of time Jubilee. There are other meridians of time on other calendars. It's not always 49 years. It could be 33 years. It can be 70 years. It's a period in the center of Earth's history, actually 4/7 of the way through. But on the Jubilee calendar, we already saw both of these slides separately. John the Baptist was born just 3 days after the beginning of the Jubilee on Sunday, the 3rd of October, 2 BC. And it ended really with the Virgin Mary's death on the very last day of that Jubilee. And I don't know any deep hidden symbolic meaning of those two, except that, John was to be the forerunner of Christ, so that one fits pretty well. I'm not sure why his mother would have died right at the end of it. But anyway, I'm just saying that those two lives did, in fact, encompass the Meridian of Time Jubilee. Next slide, 209. And this slide, we'll be quick on this slide. It's talking about the burning Jubilee that we're in now. And I've got a picture on the rapture. That's a standard Christian picture. That's not how I really picture the rapture, but there's something that happens when Christ returns where some people are raised up. It's in the scriptures, but it's been pointed out by Denver that that's very few, and most Christians think that it's like all Christians or something, and there's no evidence. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that that is not true. But there is a tribulation coming, the destruction of the wicked, and the second coming. And all of those events, from what we've talked about already, appear to be within the 49-year period that began on Sunday, the 28th of September, 2008. In fact, the very next day, the Dow crashed 777 points, which some people take as significant with the numbers. And we've talked about how in the second week water would be good to be baptized because it's the water week. Let's move on to 210. So now the rest of tonight's slides will be on this subject. The flood, the great deluge, which a lot of even LDS people don't really believe happened the way that it's described in Genesis, and don't really believe that Genesis is a revelation from God. And I believe both of those things. It may not have been perfectly preserved, but it's really close. It has intrigued me from the first time I've read it on how weird the story is. If it were just a flood, and they could have said, there was a big flood and everybody died except Noah, and he preserved the animals, and that would have been fine. Instead, they give this chronology. And before I go through the chronology on this slide, let me note that the way we've been doing the applications of these calendars, we've been working back in time. So we started with Christ and found some anchor dates in his life, especially his birth and baptism and resurrection. And then we worked back to get back to the time of Moses. And from Moses, we got back to Abraham. Most people have no trouble going back to Abraham. Almost everybody believes Abraham existed. He's the father of the Muslims, of the Jews, of the Christians. He's a figure that everybody believes in. When you go back to the flood, it's iffier, and I purposely put off talking about the flood until now for two reasons. One is I thought I'd probably lose some listeners who can't believe a flood story. And number two, the flood is mostly timed on the Jubilee calendar. So we couldn't talk about it until now. But let's look at how weird the story is. A week after loading the ark, and this is all in Genesis, the rain begins falling, and they tell you what day it starts to fall on. They tell you it rains for 40 days. The preparation for this slide is, until now in the Bible, they didn't tell you any particular date of anything, not down to the day. They'd say that so-and-so lived so many years and begat a son, and they lived so many years. There's lots of dates given to the year. This tells you 17 Heshvan is a day on the Hebrew calendar. They don't call it Heshvan. They say the second month, and you have to know that they counted the months from the fall at that time. But basically, they tell you the day that started to rain. It rained for 40 days. They tell you the day on which the ark rested, that the water abated for 150 days, whatever that means, after the rain stopped. And 40 days after that, as if you could tell what day the water abated. I mean, they're in an ark. Then 40 days after that, a raven's released, followed by a dove every week for 3 weeks. And the one that always got me was, they said, and on one Tishri, which is New Year's Day back then, and it still is for most Jews. It's the fall day, first day of fall. It says, on that day, the land dried. What do you mean the land dried? I mean, I'm here where snow is melting in Utah. I can't look out and say, oh, today the water all went away. I can't even do it with the little snow we have, let alone a whole flood. So what does that even mean, the land dried on this day? And then they tell you the exact day they exited. And it goes on with the day they made an offering. That is weird, to have all that detail in a book where no detail's been given before. What's all that about? The next few slides, we're going to look at those. And all of those dates, every one of those is going to be found to be holy on several holy calendars, which is really unusual, and most of them on the Jubilee calendar. So let's go to slide 211. I call it Noah's Ark Day, when the ark began loading. That's 1 week before the rain started to fall. It's 10 Heshvan, 7 days before 17, like we read, which is nothing special on the Hebrew calendar. That's not a holy day. But that day was Zero Prime, which means rebirth, which means baptism, which means a flood day. So this is going to be the baptism of the earth, is the great deluge. So it's right on Zero Prime on the Venus calendar, which is it's not even once a year. Zero Lord Mercury and Zero Autumn on the uniform Enoch. And that turns out to be the same on all three of those calendars, the same as the rebirth or baptism of the Savior. And I have references to past slides. We don't need to see those, but we had several slides on the baptism of the Savior. So this is a huge symbolism. The baptism of the earth is on the same day on these three, unusual for these three to align calendars. As the baptism of the earth, baptism of the same as the lineup. That's just the first one. Next slide. Slide 212. The day that the rain actually begins, a week later, 16th of November, 2343 BC. And it's in the watering millennium, it's the watering jubilee, the watering week, and it's on the day zero water, which is called it's the zero of watering is the last day of planting, as the POO means last day of the planting week. On the jubilee. So that's a huge day in the whole history of the world, in the watering millennium and water jubilee and everything. This is why the dates are given. I will suggest the reason the dates are given down to the day is A, so that we can know what they are, figure it out, but B, it's a witness that God wrote Genesis. Anybody, when they think it's a campfire story, campfire stories are not going to have all of these dates on all of these calendars, which nobody's even known about, or at least many of them, I believe, are unknown. The scriptures say that these things have been unknown by anybody and would come forth in the last dispensation, and the prophets have been waiting to have some of this information come out. So nobody's known this, and that's right in the book of Genesis. Next slide, 213. So when you count, well, let's see, it says the flood began on 17 Heshvan, and I call that Deluge Day on the perpetual Hebrew calendar. It's 7 flower, which isn't too amazing on the sacred round and not too symbolic, I don't believe, but it is a holy day. And it stopped 40 days later on 17. Oh yeah, this is huge. The day the rain stops is very meaningful on both of those calendars. It's 17 mid-autumn. That is Deluge Day on the uniform Enoch calendar. So it started on Deluge Day on the perpetual Hebrew, and it ends on Deluge Day on the uniform Enoch. And it ends on 7 storm, and that's very meaningful. Storm is what's happening. And storm means a rain from the sky. One of the sacred round days is water, and that refers to a lake or sea or water on the ground. And storm is either rain or a rain of fire. It can be a fiery rain or just a rain, but it's from the sky instead of on the ground. So that one's a bullseye. Next slide, 214. The ark rested, and from different accounts, it's 14,000 feet up on Mount Ararat. It's way high, in other words. This is not a local overflowing of the Euphrates. And several people have gone up and seen the ark and gone through it, seen the rusted iron holes in the cages. These are books that were written years ago. I'm not even sure they're still in print. But anyway, it rests up on Mount Ararat. That's in the Bible. And the resting date is given as the 17th of Nisan, which is not a holy day on the Hebrew calendar at all. It's 2 days after Passover. But on the Enoch calendar is the end of Passover. And they have passed over the continents, if you understand and believe what Joseph Smith taught. They started in the Americas and ended up over in Turkey on Mount Ararat. They passed over the ocean. So it's a perfect symbolism. It's the end of Passover on that calendar and the end of transplanting, T-O-O, T is transplanting and O-O is the end, last day of, on the Jubilee calendar. And so again, the fact that they tell you the exact day on these things is meaningful. I don't, on this one, I don't go through the decision days because they're not on there's no decision days on the Jubilee calendar. But the doves and all of those went out on decision days on mostly on the Hebrew calendars, I recall, one of the calendars. The flood waters abated. Oh, man, I think we will do decision days. Excuse me. That's, I think, still coming up. The flood waters abated on the day of, what's the day on the sacred round? One water. I mean, that's a bingo. One Sivan is just a month holy day on that, but it's on first fruits and Easter. And on the priest calendar, it's delivered. They've been delivered. And delivered not only means saved from the storm, delivered means dropped off at their new destination. It's a lot like transplanted. When Moses delivered the children of Israel, he didn't just take them out of bondage. He takes them to the promised land. It's like a milkman delivered. Well, we don't have them anymore. A delivery truck delivers things, packages. But see, we're told the exact number of days. And when it says 150 days, everybody says, oh, that must be 5 months of 30 days. No, it's 150 days, exactly. So those numbers come out right on the nose. Next slide, 216. Yeah, these are the decision days. And not everything's on the Jubilee calendar, but 40 days after the water is abated, a raven's released, and it's a day that I call Raven Day because it shows up over and over with the ravens. And then a dove is released on the 3 decision days of the 17th, 24th of Tammuz, and the 2nd day of Ab. And this is on the standard. These are 3 weeks that are celebrated by Orthodox Jews every year. They don't call them decision days, but it's 3 weeks they're aware of, and I forget. The first one is called the Fast of Tammuz, 17th. I don't think they have names for the other two. But anyway, number 217. So what about the land drying? After the flood, the land dried on Saturday, the 20th of September, 2342 BC. 1 Tishri, it gives that. That's in the Bible. It's the first day of that month. Well, that turns out to be the Day of Atonement on the Hebrew calendar, oil. And they exited on 0 water 1 Jubilee year after they started. So the rain started, and when I say after the start, I mean after the rain started. The rain started on 0 water, and they exit on 0 water. So there you have it. Let's see if we have any more on that. Slide 218. Okay, here's a few more things on the life of Noah. And then we're just about to the time where we go to questions. Noah was born 600 years before the great flood, and this is his birth date. And he's born on 1 water. Is that perfect for Noah or what? And he's born on 1 water, the same as the flood's going to start. Oh, this is 1 water on the sacred round, by the way, not on the Jubilee. And 1 Lord on Venus, and 1 Elul. And Elul, even though it's not a major holy day, it corresponds to Lord. Each of the 12 months on the zodiac, on the Hebrew calendar, correspond to these other ones on a planetary. So this is really like 1 Lord on a couple of calendars, and then 1 fullness. And I'm not sure exactly what that would mean with him, except he is one of the top people that receives a fullness. Let's go to slide 219, which is his death. So he dies at age 950 on the day 1 Eagle. So he's born on 1 water, dies on 1 Eagle. He dies on 1 Prime. Now, 1 Prime was the day the flood started. So see, he's born on 1 anyway, his life ties to the flood and ties to baptism all over the place. He dies on the Hebrew holy day of lights. That's called the Festival of Lights, or it's also called the Festival of Dedication. Hanukkah is more of the dedication. It's when the temple was rededicated in 165 BC on 25 Kislev. And he dies on the end of watering on the Jubilee calendar. One comment on this, I've said it before, but it bears repeating. There's a lot of holy days that were not given to Moses, which are added afterwards, and the Festival of Lights is one of them. And it's named because at the rededication in 165 BC, on 25 Kislev of the temple, after the desecration by the Seleucid, by the Greeks and that period, they rededicate it. And there's this miracle with the light oil burning for 8 full days instead of just one day. That's all they had. So it leads to a whole week celebration called Hanukkah. Well, that didn't happen until 165 BC. Is that a real holy day or not? Well, it turns out that Noah is born on that day. Reuben is born, I believe. Yeah, Reuben is born on that day, and one of the other of the 12 tribes. 2 of them are born on that day. Yes, it's a real holy day, but in my work, that I wasn't born knowing that. That took research to find out, and it took several witnesses. But when I find Noah, there were no other dates for Noah. Anyway, when I find these big names being born on that day, that kind of verified that they were indeed holy days. That, I believe, we've gone through the whole flood up to the death of Noah. So let us stop there on 219, and we will start on 220 next time. And before we have questions, let me comment on a couple of questions from last week. I mentioned that I was thinking of maybe writing a new paper on how the actual star feast days work. I had identified most of them, but I couldn't tell how they changed by precession on the star calendar. And we haven't talked about any of that in this class, but the point is somebody in the class said they really would like to see a paper like that. And I will tell them here that turned the tide for me or for somebody, because when I prayed what to do, it was to write that paper. So in this last week, I finished the work on the wall calendar, which is coming out next week for the April. It goes for a year starting in April. So the wall calendar is done and ready to ship next week. And in the last 3 days, I was able to write an article that came out this morning. So there's a new article on my website about holy days on the star calendar. So that was precipitated by a question here. So again, or a request here, same as that's like a question. So your questions are important. They lead to papers and lead to revelation, actually. When people ask questions, answers can come. That's all I had on past things. Someone might have, I think somebody, maybe Russell, sent a question this week, and I don't have it in front of me. So anybody that has a question, and I don't have the app up now where I can see the chat. So Glenn, if you would read any questions from the chat, or if anybody's asked a question, I am listening.
Okay, there's no chat questions yet, but I'll pause for a second in case someone has a question. If not, I have a couple. And so the question I have is, it was way back, it was at least 10 years ago, John, you wrote an article about the 7 angels and the
Yes,
constellation, and you did some alignments with this 7x7 table, and it was been a long time.
right.
But the question that I have for you, you named 7 principal angels. And with those angels, of course, I believe it started at Peter. I don't know if that now, with what Denver is taught, that it's better aligned with John the Beloved. Then we have Moses, and then it goes down, and I forget. There had to have been someone after.
Yeah,
No,
I remember all of them in the order. Is your question to review that, or what's your question?
well, the question is, what is with the constellations, and there's 7 main divisions here. What about the 4 presiding angels in the constellations, 7 versus 4? What is it about those 4? The Uriel, the Raphael, the Michael, and the Gabriel, and they all control, and I'm thinking about the calendars and water and
Right.
how
I can.
are they aligned to those elements, and why are there 4 key powers of heaven, so to speak?
I can respond.
Okay.
Picture a pyramid. Now, I'm not sure this is correct. This was one of the first things I was shown. And then I'll show you, I'll describe the pattern. But I've got several papers on this, not only identifying the angels, but the most important thing is the pattern. And then you can fill in names. But there's so much evidence for the names. I've never changed what I spent a long time trying to get it right, and I have never changed what my original suggestion was. Picture a pyramid, and it has 4 corners, 90 degrees apart, the standard like the Great Pyramid. And then there's 4 points around on the earth. There's 1 point up on top. And picture a point in the center of the square. And then picture a point, an upside down pyramid down under the earth. So there's 7 points, and 4 of them are on the 4 corners of the earth. And 1 is in heaven, and 1 is kind of on earth, or something like on earth, but different. And then there's 1 down in the underworld. That's the first thing I was shown on how the 4 and the 7 work. So the key to your answer is, why are the 4? So the answers are, the 4 are part of the 7, and they're part of the 7 that are called the 4 corners of the earth, and that's one of the reasons they would be. Now, if you're going to draw that as a picture that's not 3-dimensional, the way it's drawn is how so many constellations are in the sky. It's like the Big Dipper. It's a square, and out of the square, out of 1 corner, comes 3 stars that are like a handle. I like to call it a kite with a tail that has 3 knots in the, in it, the 3 ribbon bows or whatever. So it's a set of 4 with 3 coming out. The meaning of that, or what it's all about, it's a double presidency. You can start at the one end of the tail, and the president, and I have a paper. One paper on this is called The Pattern of 7. It was written in 2014, as I recall. It was written before I ever heard anything that Denver ever said about angels or anything about patriarchal priesthood. This is the one that shows the patriarchal priesthood is above the Melchizedek. And it's right in the Doctrine and Covenants. The president one of the presidents is at the end of the tail. And you count him as the president, and the first counselor is the next one, and the second counselor is the next one, and the secretary of the quorum is at the corner of the square. And you also have a presidency of 4 going the other way. Now that you're at the corner of where the square of the tail is, go kitty corner across. That star is another president, and his first counselor is on his right hand. So picture him facing you. So the square to his right is his first counselor. The square to his left is his second counselor, and his secretary is shared. The 7th guy, the secretary, is shared by both quorums. That's the symbolism. It's everywhere in the sky. The Big Dipper is one of them. I have one paper called the Super Constellation, and it's 7 constellations, each of which have 7 stars for 49. And those 7 constellations form another constellation, which is another Dipper. It's a super constellation made up of other constellations. So not only are there 7 times 7 stars, but the constellation themselves, if considered like a single star, also form another kite pattern. Or actually, it forms a Dipper pattern. So there you have the pattern of 7 and how the 4 fit together. Now, if you want, I will comment on what are the 2 presidencies and how they work.
Yes, please.
On the main ones. So we're going to do the tail first. And these positions are all numbered, and that's called number 1. And the number 1 position is Peter, and it's the head of the celestial kingdom. This is the one that would be the top of the pyramid. It's the celestial. It's not on earth. It's a king. It's a celestial kingdom. So this man, when Jesus said, "I give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven," to my knowledge, he's the king of that. He's the head man of that. And Denver has talked about that. Peter, James, and John. Peter arrived with the keys, and Denver has said over and over, just because he said he had the keys doesn't mean he gave them to anybody. And I agree. Anyway, he's got the kingdom. He's the keys of the kingdom of heaven, meaning celestial kingdom. The number 2 man is the head of the terrestrial kingdom. And these are future kingdoms after the judgment. And if you think about, I won't go through the whole derivation. We're going to use all the time on this one question, but it's the only question so far. Who is somebody that could be over the terrestrial kingdom, who always was in charge of a people who just didn't want to know Christ themselves and didn't want to do everything for celestial, and said, "You be our prophet. We'll follow you." The answer is Moses. Moses is over the terrestrial kingdom, I say, and he's the second angel. Oh, these have names. The first one is Uriel or Uriel. I'm not sure how to say it, Peter. The light of God. The second one is Raguel, the friend of God, is Moses. Even though Abraham's called the friend of God, Abraham's not in this. Abraham's in he's on a whole separate thing. And Denver has emphasized that many times. He's another father. He's in another line. The third man is over the celestial kingdom. Who is somebody that might understand how to deal with people that are actually, a lot of them, murderers and actually not following the program at all, and rebellious and worldly and Babylon. And this one was the hardest one to get for me. I worked a long time, but I haven't had any reason to change it. It's Abel. Abel, who was the first one killed. Oh, most of these men are the first ones to somewhere. Abel is the first one to the spirit world. There's nobody there. He gets there. It's like, and Lehi, there's a whole set of people. Noah is going to be the first one to the, what we now call the old world. And a lot of people of the big ones are the first, Lehi, the first one to come back. And they inherit a whole continent and that kind of thing. Anyway, I submit that Abel is, and it's Sariel, like Prince of God, S-A-R, and it's also in the Ethiopian, it's more like Sarakiel. There's a K in it somehow. I'm not sure exactly which one is right. I use Sariel as the Hebrew, and that's the one I call it. Now we're down to the middle one. The middle one is going to be double. The middle one, number 4, is both the fourth one, or the secretary of the quorum of the spiritual levels, and he's also going to be the other one that we'll talk about. He's over the sons of perdition. This was one of the big clues. You read through section 88, and it says, and the trumpet will sound, and all of those of the celestial kingdom will come forth, and the trumpet sounds, and you realize who's blowing the trumpet, and there are these angels. And it says right in there, the angels are in order, and each one of them is over a 1,000-year period. And there's a ton of clues to do this puzzle. That's how I did it. This was not revelation. This was a lot of work on puzzle solving. And I haven't found any better solution because the pictures are in the sky. Like the picture of Peter is him being crucified upside down. And that doesn't fit anybody else that I know for being the kingdom of heaven. So anyway, moving on. I was astounded in reading the section 88 when it says, and after the telestial, another trumpet will sound, and it will be those remaining, the sons of perdition will come forth in the resurrection. And I thought, I knew they got a resurrection because everybody's resurrected. But they get a trumpet. They get a guy. They get an angel who's been working with them. And I really prayed to know what's going on. Who's this angel? And how come these guys get a trumpet? And, and of course, you find out the Lord loves everybody and everybody has a chance to improve. Well, who is somebody that works with them? And you pretty much have to read the book of Enoch to understand this. Oh, I'm gonna hustle. This one question will take all the time, but I think there's those interested. You read the book of Enoch, and there's a bunch of people that come down called watchers, and they were angels that were watching people on earth, and they watched the women too much and came down and had children by them. And God kicks them out and says, you're going to fry in hell till the end of the earth. And they come to Enoch and beg and say, go to God, go to the Lord and get us out of this and reduce our sentence. And you read that and you say, wait a minute, these are angels. What are they doing coming to Enoch? By the way, by this time I knew the book of Enoch was true, which most people don't. So most people might reject it at this point. I'm saying, what's going on? And the answer is, book of Enoch is written, I believe, after he was translated. He's the first one to go to heaven. That's where Enoch's the first one to. He's up in heaven, and these angels were his people in his city of Enoch. He's their file leader. And to become a son of perdition, you have to know God and know the truth and have a perfect knowledge. These are translated people who after translation have fallen. And when Enoch does go and plead for them with the Father or with Christ, the Lord, whoever he pleaded with, the answer was no. They knew better. They bit it off. I'm not telling you how it comes out at the very end, but they're going to be in hell till the end of the millennium, basically. So who's going to work with them? Who better than Enoch? These are his friends. These are his subjects. And now they're in hell. And the worse than hell, it's called perdition. And it's below hell. It's there's 7 levels. anyway, it's there's different levels of hell, it turns out, just like different levels of heaven. There's 3 levels: paradise, hell, and perdition are the 3 levels of the underworld, of the spirit prison areas. And these guys are in perdition. That's a lot of words to say. Enoch is the man over perdition, and he's working with these all through the millennium, meaning now. And they're not going to resurrect till the end, because they still have a chance to somehow repent. And he's trying to get them to work up to at least make it to celestial kingdom, I believe, is what he's doing. And that's why the judgment is postponed till the end of the earth. Okay, we got to go faster. We're at the time. Enoch's number 4, and he's the secretary of both. Now you start at the other end and come this way. Oh, all of that was Melchizedek priesthood. That's the Melchizedek priesthood. That's the church. Those are the leaders of the church. Melchizedek, the man Melchizedek, was born on the star at the tail of the Big Dipper. That's his star. He is the head guy of the Melchizedek priesthood. And that he's called that because he's the great high priest. They named the priesthood after him. And he's not Mr. Patriarchal priesthood. He's not in the patriarchal. That's the higher one. Peter's not in patriarchal. He's the head. He's one of the head guys in the kingdom of heaven. See, they're doing different things. Now you go the other way. This other way is the patriarchal priesthood, and it's the highest. The highest is the lowest, and it's reversed. The clue to all of this is in section 107, where it says there are 7 presidents in the presidency of the 70s quorum, and the last of them is the president of the whole thing. That's Adam. He's the 7th. Number 7, he's the 7th angel, and he's the archangel, and he's the top angel. But he's numbered 7. And he's over the 7th 1,000 years of the earth. The numbers go that way on the chronology. Anyway, he's Mr. Patriarchal priesthood. He's Mr. Father, and he's number 7. Coming down, his right-hand man, his first counselor, is Noah, who is the father of everybody after the flood. He's the second patriarchal. He's the main one. Joseph Smith said that the first in the priesthood is Adam, and the second in the priesthood of the high priesthood is Noah. He never said who was third. Oh, as far as the jobs, Noah seems to be, Adam is over the whole earth. Now we're to the 4 angels of the earth. This is the answer back to your question, Glenn. These 4 coming this way are the 4 angels of the earth. Adam is one of them, called Michael as an angel. Noah, who is Gabriel, is number 2. Adam's over the whole earth, just like a priesthood quorum in a deacon's quorum. The president's over the whole quorum, and they'll often divide it so that the first counselor is over 1/2 geographically. See, not spiritually. They don't say you're over the celestial deacons, you're over the terrestrial. No. You're over the ones on the east half of the ward, and you, Mr. Second Counselor, are over those on the west half. Same thing here. Noah is Mr. Eastern Hemisphere. He lands the boat there, and he is Mr. Asia and cold Eastern Hemisphere. The third, who's angel number 5, I believe, is Joseph Smith, and he is Mr. Western Angel, and his name is Phanuel. The 4 angels, I do not believe, are Uriel. Uriel is the celestial kingdom guy. I believe I know why Denver said those are the 4. It's because in the book of Enoch, those 4 are often mentioned together. But that's something else. When they tell you chapter 20 of the book of Enoch, they tell you the jobs of the angels, and they tell you who the 4 are, and it's Phanuel. Phanuel is Joseph Smith, which means face of God. And when Jacob wrestled, we're 5 minutes over. When Jacob wrestled with an angel, he said, "What's your name?" And then the angel said, "Well, you don't really need to know that." And then it says, he named the place Peniel, which is Phanuel, because he said, "I saw the face of God." Joseph Smith's a wrestler. He'll wrestle anybody, anytime. Anyway, the angel number 5 is Phanuel. And when you look at what he is over the hope and salvation of the whole world, besides being Mr. Western Hemisphere. So the whole Zion Western Hemisphere is Joseph Smith. The whole Eastern is Noah. And but when you read the eulogy that John Taylor wrote in section 135 of Joseph Smith, he said he's done more for mankind than anybody save Jesus Christ alone. And I thought, how can that be when Adam is number 1 and Noah's number 2? Well, the answer is, it's true. Joseph Smith did more writing scripture. Just look at everything he's done. His whole work has been the salvation of mankind, which he's doing at the end. He's the second lamb to be taken to the slaughter. Jesus is the first, he's the second. Joseph Smith's a huge figure. I say he's number 5 in Phanuel, and he's the trumpet. He's the angel with the trumpet in his hand to go to all nations. It's not Moroni, it's Joseph Smith. That's who that is, I believe. And then the 4th one is Enoch again, as the secretary of both quorums. Okay, I'm done. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, that filled in so many missing pieces. Thank you. And do you remember what that article is titled, John?
Yes, I've got a couple. One is that first one is called 7 Angels and 7 Trumpets.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't do the 7x7 grid. That one is called something else about 7 angels.
Oh,
but
that's
I think it's just called 7 Trumpets. The one called 7 Trumpets, and it's way back. Look for 7 Trumpets, and you'll find it. Yep. All righty. We will do this again next week.
Hey, thanks all for joining. Thanks for going over a little, John. Appreciate it. See you next week.
You bet. Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.